Okay, let's jump right to it. We have 60 minutes full of information as usual. I will try to walk through the only representative role and what are the key factors to look at when you are appointing an only representative in some 30 minutes to leave still enough space for the questions and answers. So as I mentioned, I'm very happy to have Jan Homek here with me today. For those of you who joined later, Jan is the co-owner and success architect at REGARTIS. And especially with expertise in REACH registrations, not only joint submissions, but also lead registrant role and SIEF management, which is in some cases vital for the only representatives. Together with our partner company, we provide full scope of UK REACH and EU REACH compliance services. So don't hesitate to ask if you have any questions. What we want to cover, Jan hasn't seen this one, so I will ask him if he has the right answer. I'm easy to get into, but hard to get out of. What am I? Marriage, trouble, debt, or only representative contract?
My guess would be that you are all of them, all of the choices, starting with marriage, which may go through trouble and ending some debts. And unfortunately, if you have in plus some obligations under the UK REACH, you may also need an only representative contract. So every answer should be the correct one.
You are right, of course. So we will not be covering the troubles of marriage or debt. We will be covering the only representative contracts and only representative potential benefits as well as issues. And the motto of today's webinar is that appointing an only representative is quite similar to marriage. The reason why is, first of all, it's hard to appoint an only representative, but harder to change one. And also, the vast majority of companies stay with their only representatives for quite a long time. So it's really important to make sure to choose the right partner. So we will start with the basics. Who can nominate the only representative? What is the role of the only representative? And then we will get into more practical issues of why you really want to make sure to choose the right only representative, and especially how to recognize one, how to recognize a reliable and trustworthy only representative. So the theory, I'm sure a lot of you know that. We are speaking about UK REACH today, but in the EU REACH it's the same. The only representative has to be a legal person or a natural person established within the territory in scope of the legislation. So if we are speaking about UK REACH, it's the Great Britain. Please do not mix up with the United Kingdom. We will get to that in a minute. Second, the only representative needs to be equipped with sufficient background, in particular in practical handling of substance-related information to submit the registration. There is a detailed guidance on ECHA website, and it has to be appointed by what I would call a producer. So to make it simple, producer means a manufacturer, formulator of mixtures, or producer of articles established outside the territory of Great Britain. The responsibilities of the only representative go beyond what most of the companies are dealing with now concerning downstream user import notifications or grandfathering notification, which is reserved for the manufacturers. We covered that in our previous webinars, so I will not go into detail here. But the role of the only representative is much broader. In fact, it's to comply with all legal requirements imposed on importers. So technically, the only representative takes on the role of an importer on behalf of the non-GB-based manufacturer, article producer, or formulator of mixtures, which inherently means that it is a continuous service for the non-GB manufacturer or producer. It's a long-term relationship. It's not a one-time job like downstream user import notification. Downstream user import notification is only the start. and then the sustained compliance is what the only representative needs to take care of. So basically the non-GBB producer gives everything concerning his compliance to the hands of the only representative. And there are some possible supply chain scenarios which may face. There's a lot of them, but I wanted to cover at least the three basic ones. I will stop sharing the screen for a second because I will start drawing the scenarios on the wall. Here is the best picture of the United Kingdom and Ireland we were capable of drawing. I hope you can recognize it. And for the sake of UK reach, we can divide it into the three regions, three territories. So when I'm talking about Great Britain, of course I mean the island of Great Britain, and then we have the island of Ireland, comprising of Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. But for the purposes of reach, this is one territory. We covered this in detail in one of our previous webinars. You will have the links there, so you can check it there. But when we are talking about GBbased owner representatives or non-GBbased manufacturers, producers, this is the borderline. So the first scenario is that we have the rest of the world here, and a manufacturer or formulator of a mixture or producer of an article from non-GB territory, so let's call him producer, wants to export to GB. The way to do that is to appoint an owner representative. So that's the most simple scenario. Second scenario is that non-GB producer wants to export to GB again, but there are a few players on the way in the supply chain. So the supply chain can get really complicated, and through several pieces of the supply chain, the goods should go into Great Britain. The point is that the manufacturer or the producer should be the one appointing the owner representative. There can be legal arrangements, for example, 3-sided contracts, 4-sided contracts, how to achieve that even some players alongside the supply chain can appoint an owner representative, but this is really a legally technical issue. So if you have any questions concerning that, please come back to us. And third scenario I want to cover is GB-based manufacturers who already had an owner representative in the past when the UK was still part of the EU, but they transferred their registrations to the EU. What happens then? I will do my presentation again so you can see it. We are getting this question quite a lot, so I wanted to cover it here. If you were a GB-based manufacturer before Brexit with a valid REACH registration, EU REACH registration, which you transferred to an EU-based legal entity. Sorry, if you were of course, non-GB-based manufacturer, but you had a GB-based owner representative who transferred the registration to EU. Now you need to appoint another owner representative specifically for Great Britain. It's now two legislations, UK REACH, EU REACH, so you need two owner representatives if you want to stay on both markets in the United Kingdom as well as in the EU. As I mentioned, we covered in detail all these scenarios and some more in one of our previous webinars, so feel free to watch it. And now I will get to the basic requirements or tasks of the only representative, which are mandatory for all only representatives to achieve full compliance on your behalf as the non-GB-based producer. Basically, it comes down to 3 steps. First is downstream user import notification. This is not really a mandatory step, but it can buy you 2, 4, or 6 years of additional time before submitting the full registration. Again, we covered this in one of our previous webinars, so I will not go into detail here. Second step would be an inquiry to the UK HSE and followed with the full registration. Let's take a look at those. Submitting the downstream user import notification if you want additional 2, 4, or 6 years of time before full registration should be done before 27 October through the only representative if you are non-GB based company. And the precondition is that you had to export the substances you want to notify to Great Britain in 2019 or in 2020. That's a precondition for you to be eligible to submit the downstream user import notification and benefit from the extended registration deadlines. What is needed for the downstream user import notification? Again, you have a link to one of our previous webinars. Second step, submit an inquiry to UK HSE. Question is when? And there we are starting to discuss potential compliance strategies. In our humble opinion, the best timing to submit an inquiry to UK HSE is as soon as you know you will need to register the substance. Let me tell you why. Because the inquiry puts you into what is called a substance group. Under EU REACH, it was formerly known as SIEFs, Substance Information Exchange Fora, where you have all potential other co-registrants, and you can discuss with them, you should discuss with them how you will deal with joint submission of the registration, and especially data sharing issues and cost sharing issues for the same substance. So the sooner you join this group of potential registrants, the more power you will have in the discussions, or the more control over the discussions going on, and especially on the nomination of the lead registrants you will have. So in my opinion, the case is clear here. As soon as you know that you will need the registration in future, you should submit an inquiry, which is quite a straightforward and easy process, especially if you already have an existing EU REACH registration. It's no big deal. When is the best time to submit a full registration dossier to the UK authorities? Well, that's a more complex question, and depending on a few key factors. Things like if you potentially want to become a lead registrant, or you are seeking the role of joint submission or the co-registrant. If you are a holder of data, or if you want to generate your own new data, or if you are relying completely on data of somebody else, all options come into play. For example, even though it's mandatory to share vertebrate data generated on vertebrates, for example, physicochemical properties are typically tested and can be tested without buying the letter of access. It's all about, of course, costs and effort needed. Some companies have in-house capacities to test physicochemical properties, some don't. So it really depends on your particular situation. Of course, it also depends on the tonnage band. You have different deadlines, but also you might have different drivers to have the full registration earlier than those deadlines. We know from EU REACH that REACH registration number seems to be kind of a door opener for business discussions if you are trying to sell your goods to potential customers. This is what you will most likely face when you will start seeking for an own representative. And now I'm trying to get to the part how to recognize and assess differences between competitive offers and different only representatives. I will try to be as open and honest based on our experience as possible. So this is what you will typically face when you have multiple service offers from different only representatives on your desk. There are a few items which are mandatory for all only representatives. For example, volume tracking for the authorities. That's a mandatory item. So everybody, of course, does that. Record keeping of 10 years. That's a mandatory item. And for example, the legislation monitoring, not explicitly mentioned as a mandatory item in the legal text, but of course, since the only representative is the one who is liable for compliance, and it's the inspectors, and he is the one who will get a visit from the inspectors in case something is not perfectly in line. All only representatives, in their best interest, usually do the legislation monitoring. But then there is a lot of items which sometimes are included already in the service, sometimes are charged extra. Let's take a look at some of those. What a top class only representative gives you is a competitive advantage. Just remember, there are in principle two reasons to appoint an only representative in the first place. Typically, it's to relieve your customers from importers' duties. Because the other option would be that you would ask your importers, your customers in Great Britain, to do the registrations and to take care of compliance. So you could say that it's their duty. But if you want to have freedom to sell to anyone, regardless if he is already compliant or if he wants to deal with REACH compliance, you are relieving your customers and getting the freedom to sell to anyone on the market. And of course, you have a peace of mind that your products are compliant if anybody wants to see compliance. And there are several services which are not inherently or always included in the only representative service package. Often they are, for example, the volume tracking for the customers in terms of issuing tonnage coverage certificates. That's typically what the producers want to see and their customers want to see, to have some kind of document declaring that the substance or the product they are buying is covered by each registration and is compliant. Of course, there are differences between reporting periods. Some only representatives have the dormant mode of operation when they report or answer to their customer only when they are asked. Some of them have reporting periods of 1 year, 3 months, 6 months. So you should always check how frequently your only representative will be reporting to. And linked with that are regulatory news. Most of the only representatives are monitoring things like general regulatory news, things like substance specific concerning your particular substance, what is already issued, what is already adopted, but we will get in a few slides to some more details that there can also be additional items which might be really crucial or important for you. Communication within the supply chain with the customers and suppliers, and in general, how effectively and how strong can the only representative support you in the eyes of your customers and in the eyes of your suppliers. So a good only representative goes beyond the minimum requirements. And if I started with some, let's say, soft criteria, I'm coming more to hard criteria in terms of registration, how well the only representative can handle the registration. Factors to be considered in setting the optimum registration strategy. I already mentioned that there are a few. You might want to make sure that these are taken into account. But the point is that the only representative should always assess different options, assess your situation, and give you a transparent overview of pros and cons of different options, of course associated also with full costs, for you to have a full picture and full information for your decision making. When it comes to registration, I don't know how many of you attended our last webinar 2 weeks ago, but those of you who did, I believe you remember Paul. Paul asked us for EU REACH registration in March 2017, and through a series of steps, including data sharing disputes, including Board of Appeal case, we filed his registration. He was still, during the whole process, fully compliant, so able to manufacture and place his products on the market. I give you the link for the webinar recording again. And on the way, Paul was able to save 120,000 euro on the registration, because the only representative fees and other costs are not the only fees, and usually there are only the minor fees, which I will show shortly. But long story short, the only representative should give you full support in the whole registration process, including the letter of access negotiation and including the contract review. There are numerous cases where the drafted contract for sharing data with other co-registrants is not drafted according to the principles of fair, non-discriminatory and transparent data sharing. We also did a small survey or a research in the past among different CEFs which we were involved in. And when we are processing the statistics of typical letter of access costs, because this is a bit typical question, somebody comes to us and asks, how much does a letter of access cost? What would you answer, Jan?
I don't know. Let's ask the participant.
Yeah, of course. That's the only way how to really know. But if the customer insists on getting at least a ballpark, what I typically say is that we have seen letters of access costing over 100,000 euro. We have seen those that cost only 5,000, and typically we are seeing letters of access between 10, 50, 60,000 euro. But it's a ballpark. So we did some statistics, and you probably have the same experience that typically we are talking about tens of thousands of euro. And if you calculate all the costs together, you can clearly see that even if you pay 1,500 euro, 2,000 euro, 2,500 euro to an only representative annually, it's still only a tiny fraction of the total registration costs and total compliance costs. I will be perfectly open and honest with you that we have seen also only representatives who are charging as little as, let's say, 300 euro. But then, of course, the question is what is included in the service and how reliable the service is. So the scope and quality of the only representative services on the market is really huge. And of course, the costs associated with that are really huge as well. This is just to document the little research we did, which I was speaking about a few seconds ago. And these numbers were confirmed 2 weeks ago when we had the last webinar, and I asked a question during the webinar: what was the highest price that the participants paid for a single letter of access under EU REACH? Out of the 48 respondents who responded to this question, almost 40% said that they paid over 100,000 euro for a single letter of access, and the rest, again, over 30%, over 40% paid at least 30,000 euro for a single letter of access. So this is, in my eyes, really one of the critical parts and critical roles of the only representative, to be involved actively in the whole registration process, especially the letter of access negotiation and contract review. Is there anything you would like to add? Okay, let's move on. letter of access negotiation is not only about the process before the registration itself. We all know that the data sharing and letter of access have to be drafted based on fair, non-discriminatory and transparent principles. But it doesn't end with the registration, because thanks to Regulation 2016-9, you have a full right, and it's mandatory if you want it, to have a reimbursement clause in the contracts with the co-registrants, and mechanism for reimbursement if additional co-registrants join the SIF. Well, I'm talking about SIFs. Under UK REACH, it's substance groups, but technically it's the same. So that's another thing you might want to monitor. New registrants joining your registration, joining your joint submission, because how it might look like is shown at this example. This is a real case we had with one of our clients. He registered in 2017. The costs were nearly €100,000, and then there was a second registrant coming in 2 years later. So they shared the costs evenly, paying half each. And 1 year later, 2 additional registrants came in. So, of course, automatically we had to reimburse the second registrant and the first registrant from the fees collected from the third and fourth registrant to have everybody pay the same amount. So at the end, everybody paid 24,000 instead of 96. In some substance groups or SIFs, this is done automatically, either annually or after certain predefined milestones. But we have seen also many SIFs and consortia where this is not the case, and they don't provide any reimbursement or information about potential reimbursement until you ask. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but at least that was my experience with different SIFs. Third good reason to appoint a really good only representative is what I already mentioned, that the vast majority of companies stay with their only representatives for a very long time. Typical reasons why producers change an only representative is poor communication from the only representative, or poor reporting. Sometimes the only representative also leaves the market. It's not happening so frequently nowadays, but especially in the early days of REACH, it happened quite frequently, especially when it was a single-man company. Or even within the established only representative, sometimes the key personnel leaves the only representative. And sometimes, even with the documentation, we saw several cases like that, after trying to change an only representative, the company wasn't able to get the necessary documentation from their former only representative, even though they, of course, had it in the contracts. But do you really want to sue them if they are not handing over the documentation as they should? So, what are the 7 signs of a reliable and trustworthy only representative? I will start with a question to you. What 3 factors you consider the most critical for choosing your dream only representative? I just wanted to introduce this section with the question because, of course, I will openly admit that what I compiled is a probably biased list, but I tried to be as transparent and open and honest based on experience, what I consider the most critical signs, how you can at least recognize or assess if you are dealing with a reliable and trustworthy only representative or not. So it seems that the most important factor is the experience with REACH registrations, followed by expertise of the team. Okay, that's closely linked. Transparency of OR fees and consultancy fees, and long-term compliance assessment strategy, experience with letter of access negotiations, and only then comes the price. Okay, interesting. let's see if it resonates, what I tried to compile here. Honest, open, and prompt communication. I'm not saying that this list is ordered from top to bottom, but these 7 factors, 7 signs, I consider vital, all of them. What I would consider an open, honest, and prompt communication would be advice backed with references, so references to legal texts, official guidances of relevant authorities. At the end of the day, only court can decide if the interpretation of the consultant or of the authorities is correct. So you always might want to have everything backed with references and potentially also legal liability. The best consultants can acknowledge whenever there is any uncertainty related to the advice provided. We all know that Brexit and UK reach is still young, and there are still a few open ends or at least uncertainties, which leads to double checking the facts. Transparent cost structure, that seemed to be an important factor for you as well. So what I would consider important here is to always check what the only representative service includes and how are optional items charged. In one of the previous slides, I tried to give you a quite detailed list of all different items that the only representative services might include. So you now have an overview what you should be looking for in only representative offerings. In most cases, the only representative service is only a small fraction of the full compliance costs. You really want to check the long-term support strategy and associated costs. So it seems that we are in line together, as this was an important factor to most of you as well. That is closely linked to clear overview of different compliance routes with transparent overview of pros and cons of different options. That should always be the first step. And experience in letter of access negotiation and assessment of costs. It almost seems like we rehearsed that, but of course that's not possible. Experience with data sharing disputes or Board of Appeal cases always helps. Proven track record, I don't think that needs any comment. Staff with sound technical and legal background, that seemed to be the first most important factor to the audience today. You can usually tell that already from the initial communication, sometimes from the competitive offer, from CVs and so on. LinkedIn tells a lot. And what I also like to check when we are, for example, seeking external help from, let's say, legal experts or experts from different domains that we don't do. I always check the conferences, what are the speakers at the conferences, and try to chase the suppliers there. Replaceability, as I mentioned, you really want to make sure that if one or two experts from your supplier, from the only representative, wants to seek other career options, that the only representative will still be able to deliver the service. And the frequency of reporting of regulatory changes to you is, of course, up to your strategy and up to mutual agreement with the only representative. But I wanted to stress out here that monitoring only the requirements which are already adopted and which are often notified, for example, through Reach IT and automatic systems, is really not enough. Because in some cases, for example, if you have really hazardous substances, potential SVHCs, carcinogens, mutagens, you really want to have the information as soon as possible. If anything, any potential regulation of your products, of your substances is on the horizon. So a good only representative informs you also about regulatory changes on the horizon, monitoring different meetings of UK and EU authorities, commission meetings, and different sources of information. It's hard to put a price tag on this service because it can give you a strategic margin in your long-term decision making, but that's something you might want to consider when appointing an only representative. Before wrapping it up and jumping to questions and answers. I apologize for having the presentation a little longer, but I believe you found it useful. Take-home messages. Appointing an owner representative is sort of like a marriage. You should really take some time to diligently assess the competence and reliability of the owner representative, because it's a really long-term relationship. There's a huge variability in OR services on the market, and of course also corresponding costs. But the costs of the owner representative service is typically only a very small fraction of the full compliance cost. We will also be covering more details about all sorts of different topics around UK REACH and Brexit at the upcoming conference in April. And we also covered a lot of grounds already in our previous webinars, so you have the links here to watch anything you might find useful. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channels to get notifications about new webinars and videos. Don't panic. My favorite button is still working.
How much time does the owner representative need to fulfill his duties resulting from downstream user notification? That's a really interesting question, because it really depends on what information do you provide to the owner representative. And I'm creating a bridge to the next question, I guess, because the cooperation is key. You have to realize that the principal, the company who is appointing the OR, and the OR, they need to cooperate. They need to exchange a lot of information. So from our experience, the downstream user notification takes around 2 to 3 hours, I guess. It really depends on number of substances as well. But for one substance, it shouldn't take more than one to 2 hours, I would say. It's an easy task. You complete the table, but still you need to collect the information. So once you have everything ready, and then you start with filling the bill, it's rather quick, I would say.
If I may add to that, it's exactly about what you said in my experience about collecting the information. Once the information is collected, it's an easy task, but collecting the information might get lengthy, a few weeks typically. But of course, in some cases, and especially with existing EU REACH registrants, they already have the data at hand, which they just hand over to the owner representative, and that speeds up the process rapidly.
That's completely true. And here with the subset identification, the formal one, existing cast numbers, not existing EC numbers, and so on. So it might get complicated, but usually it's an easy task. So let's move on. Okay, Patrick asked a very interesting question. I was actually doing research during Tomáš was speaking his presentation. If my OR was based in Great Britain before Brexit, I can grandfather my registration. Is it possible to change the OR before grandfather? Well, the answer is technically yes, but there are two possible options. First, if your OR was based in Great Britain, okay, so the company is still in Great Britain, and we don't know where you are settled. So, but if you want to grandfather, okay, so he was in the EU, then he found himself in Great Britain, so he can grandfather. That's okay. What's not possible? Well, actually, you can appoint another OR in Great Britain and grandfather to this OR. That's perfectly possible. But actually, it's somehow bending the rule which was imagined, because there is I think that you need to declare also information about the receiving party during the grandfathering. So be clear about that. On the other hand, if you want to change the OR, well, let's stick to this, because if we go into EU REACH options, there will be more tricky options, I would say.
We are really talking about the situation, the scenario that you want to change the owner representative before grandfathering. That's perfectly legitimate, perfectly valid, because you had an only representative before Brexit, and the only representative automatically disappeared because the contract was drawn under EU REACH, which is no longer applicable in Great Britain. So you now have no only representative. Now, to do the grandfathering, you need to appoint an only representative, and it can or doesn't have to be the same one as you had originally. It's completely unrelated. So yes, you can change.
Monica is asking how to effectively verify OR abilities. If it's sufficiently professional and has enough legislation knowledge to provide the relevant information and service needed for a non-GB manufacturer to operate in the Great Britain market. Well, that's exactly the point of this webinar today, I would say, is to show you some options, to propose you some criteria that you might include in your selection of your best OR. We try to answer that. Actually, if I would wrap it up, clear communication, complete honesty, of course, knowing what to do. Well, putting up some strategy, some plan how to handle his OR duties, how to effectively represent the principal, and of course to report back, to come back to the principal with any issues, with any important decisions, and finally, and that's maybe the most important, behave, let's say, correctly in the relationship. So give enough time to think about options that you are presenting, be honest, and of course be discreet. That means treat information confidentially. That's also very important. That would be it from my side.
If I was in the shoes of a non-GB or non-EU manufacturer, I would definitely want to see a long-term strategy, as you mentioned, and different options, how to become and stay compliant. Also, a good test to test your potential only representative might be to send him a draft CEF agreement, draft existing imaginary agreement, where you know might be some mistakes concerning the principle of fair, non-discriminatory and transparent data sharing. And if the only representative can identify those shortcomings, then it will be a good sign, definitely. But of course, that depends if you have experience with the data sharing issues, and if you have some model contracts which you can use for this kind of test.
Okay, so actually, I just realized that the question by Monica is divided into, its long question is divided into several parts. So the next part of the question, is there any professional organization covering all the representative activities that would guarantee sufficient quality of OR services provided by members? Well, that's a really good question, I would say, because we know there are organizations who aim to take different owner representatives under their wings, but actually for each of these organizations you pay for the membership. So it's my personal opinion, of course, but the question is, if I only pay for the membership, does it guarantee the membership in the association? Does it guarantee that I'm a good OR? I would definitely prefer to ask for some record, ask for some references, if there are any references, for example, from EU REACH, because each OR under UK, or almost everyone, would already have some experience with EU REACH, most probably. There will be very few companies, very few only representatives providing only UK OR service. So almost everyone should have some experience from EU REACH. So there should be some references, and that's, for me, it's much more of a guarantee. The good reference is a much more guarantee than the membership in any association, I would say. To my knowledge, I don't know if there are some quality criteria set up by any of these organizations that would need to be fulfilled to be silver, gold, platinum, I don't know, plutonium, only representative level, so I really don't know. So let's move on to next question. If it's better to choose, again, Monica, a lot of questions by Monica, but it's good, that's fine. Is it better to choose only a representative who provides services for both Great Britain and EU markets, or all are specialized for the Great Britain market only? Well, it's slightly connected to my previous comment. I would definitely choose rather an only representative who has experience already with the EU market, with being EU reach only representative. And that's definitely because the EU reach and UK reach or the British reach are very close. I wouldn't say they are one-to-one, but they are very close, close one to another. And as far as I know, the obligations and the requirements on the only representative under a British reach are exactly the same as under EU reach. So definitely having the same OR for EU and Great Britain market will be some guarantee that there is experience and probably some quality. On the other hand, it will also save some time and some effort, especially when the substance is marketed in EU and in Britain would be the same, because we have the same substances, so same obligations, same registration dossiers, and so on. When it comes to the customers, it doesn't make a big difference. They would also be the same in case they have been supplied previously under EU reach, and they have just separated, let's say, legally from the group of customers. So for me, it would be better to have one OR for both, because I would actually save a lot of effort explaining to each of them what I need to do, and unified the communication channels and meetings and everything could be handled at the same time. So that's it. So let me check if there are any few more questions.
Yes, it was the last question.
Yes, there is a question from Hakan.
Yes.
I don't know if you have it, but Hakan is asking, what are the advantages and disadvantages of having the same OR with your competitors? Should this be a good reason to change the OR when you find out? Very good question. And it's actually related to the one that I have answered previously in writing. And it will be included, of course, in the answers you will receive after the webinar. The relationship between the principal, the appointed company, and the OR is a very tight one. Besides the cooperation, there must be trust established, and of course, there must be some guarantees. So the trust must be also guaranteed by the contract. So actually, it is clear that during this cooperation, the principal will disclose to the owner representative a huge amount of confidential information. Let's start with identification of his supply chain, identification of his customers, and much more. Also, tonnages supplied to those customers must be also made known to the owner representative, because it's the legal obligation to maintain this list. If there is another company, a competitor of the principal, appointing the same company as the owner representative, actually the first principal company should be made aware of this, should approve this, that another company having the same substances, so potentially the same supply chain, is willing to appoint the same owner representative as the first company. Actually, I strongly believe that we have this option in our contract. So if this is the case with us, if there is another company who would be willing to appoint us after, for example, Hakan's company, we need to first get the approval by our first principal, just to be sure that nothing will go wrong in the end. Of course, there is a sort of a challenge to keep information flows from both principals in the same company perfectly away one from the other, and to keep all the information confidential. To be honest, I would rather not be an only representative for the same substance for several principles. Because in theory, there will always maybe a discussion about keeping the data confidential. And when there is, and there might be a data leak, it would be very hard to explain that the leak didn't happen at the only representative site, and that would be so hard to improve. So I would rather decline the request to represent the same substance for two principles. But well, there may be some adventures, I would say. Okay. So I hope that we have answered all questions.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful afternoon. And in 2 weeks, we will get back with grandfathering step by step the first line under UK reach. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.